We are now in our 4th year of war. We have built more than 200,000 planes. We have turned out billions of gallons of gasoline, and our war production has increased an estimated 690%. Our 3rd year of war produced decisive victories. Europe was invaded. This was D-Day in June. France was liberated. This was Paris in August. This was Belgium less than a month later. In the Pacific, our forces moved westward more than 3,000 miles. But the final battles remain to be won, and the decisive materials are yet to be produced by the home forces. Our 3rd year of war saw the perfection of amphibious attack on a scale never before dreamed of. Our 2nd year of production had produced many of the specialized craft required. And in our 3rd year, those weapons and the men that had been trained to use them had their hours of trial and triumph. But to our victories, we added the problems of lengthening supply lines. We added the number of weeks required for the transportation of troops, equipment, or supplies. We added to the number of ships needed to keep men and materials moving. For convoys are slow, and the Pacific is much more vast than most of us realize. This is the pattern of attack as it was developed and perfected in 1944, our 3rd year of war. Photographic squadrons have outlined in advance the targets for today. Now the bombers and fighters are prepared for the softening up attacks. It will be the mission of some to mislead the enemy with strikes far from the intended point of landing. But all will undertake the dangerous jobs of blasting airfields, attacking shipping, bombing supply dumps, strafing concentration points. And not all of them will come back. Following the long-range softening up, the battleships prepare to bombard the target, and Kingfishers are catapulted to aid in directing the fire, which will soon fill the sky with the vengeful thunder of our guns. Ashore, the enemy digs in deep in pillboxes, waits for the barrage to lift, and hopes to live through it. Making ready for the assault, planes and smoke shells lay a smoke screen along the beach. Soon the ironclad water buffaloes and alligators will lead the way for the troops that now face the biggest, dirtiest, bloodiest job of all. This job is a 24-hour job, if need be, a Sunday job, a holiday job, perhaps. But the pay remains the same, payment in blood or glory at $50 a month. As soon as the AMP tanks and the first waves have gained a foothold, more troops pour ashore to widen and deepen the beachhead and push further inland. planes assist the advance or follow the troops to drop emergency equipment. Up front, the lines are moving deeper into the hills, overtaking positions made untenable by the terrific preliminary bombardment of offshore naval guns. These are the remains of enemy emplacements, rendered silent and useless in the hands of their dead. Meanwhile, the engineers fight time and surf and mud to bring up the heavy equipment that will be needed to rebuild airstrips and push the advance further, faster. The dirty work goes on despite the sound of enemy bombers, land-based bombers that offer new threats to our forces as we reach the defenses of Japan. Aboard the carriers, they scramble for the coming action. For now, the enemy has been stung, the landing has been achieved, but it is yet to be secured, and it remains for the fleet and the air arm to guarantee its security. Grumman Hellcats rising from the nest with Pratt & Whitney engines buzzing, wings flashing in the company of Eastern aircraft's FM-2s or TBMs, potent offensive weapons of the Navy's present-day attack. There's a TBM now. There's the powerful new Helldiver bearing the deadly greetings of the workers of Curtiss-Wright. Meanwhile, they aren't exactly having duck soup of it on the ships of the force. For while much of the naval strength of Japan has been whittled away in recent naval actions, the nearer we come to the inner defenses, the more we must expose our naval force to land-based air attack. We're getting Jap planes 6 and 10 to 1. But our men, our planes, our ships too are being lost and will be lost as long as battle must be done to bring this enemy to his knees. Our Avengers and our Helldivers are burning too, and they must be replaced. For war like ours today is not a war of champions fighting hand to hand alone. It's war demanding the time and toil of every man and woman who rivets, welds, or writes a shipping label, or mines for coal, or drills for oil. It is a war in which everyone must fight to overproduce if necessary, to overpower our enemies with ships and guns and planes. Importance to everyone in the aircraft industry was the meeting of the first International Conference on Post-War Aviation in Chicago, where the representatives of aviation all over the world met to discuss, among other questions, the future freedom of the world's air transportation routes. Before the assembled delegates representing 51 different nations, a message was read from President Roosevelt, in which the President expressed the hope that the delegates would not dally with the thought of creating great blocks of closed air, thereby tracing in the sky the conditions of future wars. Addressing the delegates, Adolf Berle, Assistant Secretary of State, concluded,
I know you will see to it that the air that God gave to everyone will not become the means of domination over anyone.
On the unofficial agenda of the conference were doubtless many private discussions on such subjects as the heralded post-war conversion of Boeing's B-29 Superfortress. The Stratocruiser, it is said, will accommodate 100 passengers and will maintain schedules with speeds up to 340 miles an hour. Officials of the Boeing company announced the possibility of New York to London crossings at a cost of $60 to $90, with the comfort of a combination observation, dining, and cocktail lounge. And as they say, breakfast in New York, dinner in London the same day. Another prominent contender for post-war air travel is Lockheed's giant Constellation, which will carry 55 passengers by day or 38 by night, spanning the continent from coast to coast in an estimated flying time of 9 hours. Meanwhile, the Martin Mars, currently flying for the Naval Air Transport Service, is piling up world aviation records. For example, the heaviest load to date, 145,000 pounds gross on takeoff. Providing an answer to the ever-present current problem of supply and one answer to the post-war questions of air freight is the new flying boxcar, the C-82, which now carries fully assembled tanks, trucks, or other heavy infantry vehicles for the Army. With its wing spread of 106 feet and a 3,500-mile range, the flying boxcar now makes it possible to move all the guns and motorized equipment of an entire infantry division by air. Among the pace setters in small planes that suggest a busy future for the aircraft industry is the Ercoupe, reported so easy to operate that youngsters are flying them after only a few hours of instruction. You can almost hear them now asking Dad, "Mind if I take the plane tonight? I've got a date in Texas, but I'll be home early." Another small plane making current history is the handy Piper Cub. Here, the Piper Cub is shown being prepared for a takeoff from the deck of a standard-length LST. Flying from such landing boats, they have proved of great use in spotting enemy beach positions and in observing gunfire. In these wartime operations, it doesn't take an expert to see great new developments in the peacetime application of such planes, creating a demand that promises to keep the workers of the aircraft industry pretty busy for some time to come. But more immediate is the present job that confronts us all. 500 miles off the coast of Asia lie the Philippines, around 7,000 miles from home. The first steps in our attack there involved softening up Japanese positions and misleading the enemy with a series of strikes which would not disclose the final point of invasion. One of the Navy's great aces, Commander David McCampbell, takes part in the attack. In 2 actions, McCampbell boosted his score to 34 Jap planes, while dive and torpedo bombers ran up their scores on Japanese shipping. Always easy, and many an American airman has found himself downed in hostile waters. But today the chances are more than likely that his rescue will come in a relatively few hours. Some time ago, 22 American flyers were picked up by one OS2U and brought safely to the submarine tank. These pictures, recently released, were made with an amateur camera by a member of the crew aboard the tank. The crippled OS2U was blown up by the sub's guns, lest it fall into Japanese hands. Preparatory to the invasion of Leyte, American airmen accounted for some 900 Jap planes shot down in the air or on the ground at some 100 or so airfields dotting the Philippine and surrounding islands. Then the assault forces moved in, landing in one operation on Leyte more American troops than were landed in Normandy on the D-Day of Europe. Thousands of amphibious craft, many of them now like aircraft powered with 100-octane gasoline, surged ashore in the push. In the invading force with General MacArthur was every able-bodied man who left the Philippines with him. And there, too, was Sergio Osmena, successor to the late Manuel Quezon, president of the Philippines. Aiding the actual landings was the 7th Fleet, commanded by Admiral Thomas Kincaid. To the north was Admiral Halsey's 3rd Fleet. When warning came that the Japanese naval forces were approaching, the 7th Fleet prepared to attack in 2 directions. Halsey sent down a carrier task force from the north. While Halsey engaged the enemy forces in the north, a strong Jap force threatened the Leyte landings from the south. But they were trapped in Surigao Strait by a brilliantly executed Kincaid maneuver. The enemy turned and ran, punished all the while by U.S. bombs and guns. In all, 24 ships were sunk, 34 probably sunk or damaged. Japanese land-based planes did some damage. Not this plane, however. It got a near miss, but it was the last bomb dropped in desperation as American gunnery found its mark and sent the Jap fighter into a deadly spin. But the Princeton was hit and had to be sunk by our own fire. In all, we lost 2 destroyers, a destroyer escort, 2 carrier escorts, the light carrier Princeton, and a few lesser ships. Against this loss was piled the substantial loss of a large part of the Jap Navy and control of the eastern approach to the Philippines. But though we are back on Philippine soil and the Japanese Navy has been seriously crippled, the biggest tasks remain. And not the least among them is the production job of feeding a 7,000-mile supply line with a never-ending stream of offensive weapons, the weapons and equipment with which to strike the final blows.